Hello, everyone. Welcome back to day 3 of Amaze Sex EdCon 2022. Let me tell you, I cannot believe we've arrived at our final day. Um, for those that it's your first day joining, I'm Dr. Rachel Gibson. My pronouns are she, her, and Aya, and I'm your host for the conference. And please welcome back my illustrious co-host, Victoria. Hi, Victoria.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. My name is Victoria Ogunleya. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm the Digital Sex Education Manager for Amaze. I'm so happy to see returning faces. I'm also really happy to welcome the people who are just joining us today. I can't believe it's day 3. Yeah, I really can't believe it's day 3.
Right? I mean, it's gone so quickly. What was your favorite moment so far?
Well, I'm a little biased. I'm going to say my Amaze Youth Ambassadors video was probably my favorite one. It was so fun creating that video, creating space for that conversation, and then also sharing it with you all and seeing your real time reactions. So that was fun. And then also yesterday, I really enjoyed how we were building community in the chat and how people were sharing resources for each other. I'm pretty sure Lakara, who was our co-host, yesterday has at least 10 new people that she's going to be mentoring soon. So I just love the community that we've been building so far. What about you, Rachel?
I think my favorite moment so far was yesterday's spontaneous Q&A. I love, engaging with um, all the Amaze enthusiasts out there and getting to know folks and building community and just I love pulling back the curtain on what we do. The number one question I always get is, how do you make the videos? And that's my favorite part of this job. It's so creative. And then I also get to
Mhm.
talk about sexuality education, right? So I love sharing kind of like the behind the scenes of what goes on for folks. But let's talk about today, because today I am so excited for. We have our amazing panel. We're going to be discussing how we can support the sexual health and rights of young people with a variety of disabilities. And then after our panel, we're going to really get into how we actually adapt Amaze and other resources for those young people. So I'm super excited for this day, and I'm so happy everyone joined. So today, again, we have our panel on supporting the sexual health and rights of young people with a variety of disabilities. To be honest, I've been like so excited for this day. So I'm truly privileged to share this stage, if you will, with these awesome humans that I'm about to introduce to you. So we have a few folks joining us today. First, we have Ava McIntosh, a soon-to-be 18-year-old and self-advocate, and she's joined by Dr. Kat Fazy, a sexuality consultant, counselor, and educator. We also have Bee Gemin, the founder of the Jew Deaf Sexual Wellness Center. And we have Robin Wilson Beatty, a speaker, writer, and advocate for disability and sexuality. Welcome to our panelists. Thank you all for being here. Hi, everyone. So pleased that you could all join us today. And let's start out with just, you know, asking how you're feeling and what made you want to join our panel today.
I'm Robin Wilson Beatty, and I actually was really excited to join this panel because I have been using Amaze videos in my presentation because that's what I do. I am a disability and sexual and reproductive health educator, and I felt like the Amaze video it was a great way to highlight so many of the things that I talk about, that I was, trying to teach other people. I talk a lot to like public health departments and, schools and that sort of thing. So I'm very excited to actually be here with the organization that created this video that always features. um, but also, I'm just excited to be here to talk about sex and disability because that is my lifelong passion to talk about.
Thank you so much, Robin. We're so happy you're here.
Hi, everyone. My name's Bee, and I am so excited to be here. right when we started, I was thinking, "Oh, wow, this is such a huge honor to be on this Amaze panel because really, obviously, Amaze was one of my first positive experiences as a sex educator. I remember when I first joined, I think it was in 2020, and I asked, would you mind providing an ASL interpreter? And I was just so nervous. And, I always deal with that issue anytime I try to join any type of conference or organization. But with Amaze, it was so smooth and simple. And the response was, of course, we'll work out accommodations for you. And I was just so shocked and amazed to have access right from the get-go. So I'm just thrilled to be here. And the other reason why I'm here is because I really want to talk about the importance of access for deaf, deafblind, deaf disabled, hard of hearing, and late deafened community to sex education. For this community, for the deaf, deafblind, deaf disabled, hard of hearing, and late deafened, we use all of those labels periodically. Whenever I talk about deaf people, I will use all of those labels, understanding that I don't speak for everyone because I'm not part of each of those communities. But as a sex educator, I see so many barriers for any kind of general education for deaf individuals regarding sex education. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. I'm so happy you are here, B. When we ran into each other, I think at another conference, and just to reconnect with you because we were in class together. It was so great. So I'm so happy you're here. Thank you so much. Ava.
Absolutely.
And Dr. Faizi.
Hi, everybody. B, it's great to see you again. It feels like forever since we were in class together. I'm very excited to be here also and can echo the things that both B and Robin shared, that I use the Amaze videos in my work all the time. I give them out as homework. I send them as links. I use them all the time, and they're so helpful for such a wide variety of people. And then I'm really excited to be part of this conference because when Dr. Gibson first reached out to me, the question wasn't, am I available? The question was, tell me about the cool people that you know who are part of the disabled community who would like to participate. And so often I'm invited to do things, and the folks that I support are not invited or included to speak and share their own experience. And so I think that is awesome. And I'm thrilled that my good friend Ava is sat next to me. And Ava, would you like to introduce yourself?
Not right now.
Not right now. So
I'm a little shy.
And that's totally okay. So it might take us a few minutes to warm up. And if people have specific questions directed to us, we might pause for a moment and then come back and answer them a few minutes later once we've gathered our thoughts. But Ava is very excited and welcoming of questions.
Awesome. So everyone joining us today, feel free to put your questions in the chat. We have people monitoring the chat, and we also previously interviewed some educators. So we're going to start the conversation off with those, but as you have questions, ask them in the chat and we'll go from there. So I want to start off talking about language, right? Language is so important and always evolving. So I kind of have a two-part question. What are your thoughts? Well, let me take a step back. So Amaze is a global project, right? We have domestic videos, we have partners and videos all over the world in more than 50 languages. And these conversations are different in different parts of the world. So I'm curious on your thoughts about person first versus identity first language. And then beyond just that, what are other ways educators and other people can use language in thoughtful and intentional ways?
When it comes to, talking about like identity first and person first, I kind of think they're kind of like two sides of the same coin, where we're talking about disability, but with the identity first, I feel like that's me embracing that, especially if I'm talking about myself as a disabled person. Because for me, that's recognizing and embracing that, yes, I'm somebody, I have a disability. And for me, that is part of my identity because, it's a large part of, how I navigate the world, because of disability. But also, I am not ashamed of having a disability. I'm not ashamed of being disabled. It's not a dirty word. And but when we're thinking of person first, that was something, I feel like in professionally is, when I'm talking about disability, that comes up because that is the language that we're taught is, correct in talking about disability and identifying the person first. And you're like, you see the person first, and it's not just their disability. They're more than just their disability. So I guess I feel like when with identity, and I feel, to me it just depends on what environment I'm in. uh Professionally, I'll use them interchangeably depending on what it is that I'm talking about. But if it is talking about just disability and I'm talking about me, I'm going to use identity first. um what I do have, kind of struggle with, because like you said, language is always changing, it's forever evolving. um you know when I was talking, when I was first coming into this work and into disability advocacy work, not necessarily sexuality, I was taught, person first, and this is, like kind of like late early 2000s, or whatever you call it, the aughts or whatever, the naughties. But that but then, I started seeing like kind of more advocacy and activism and awareness around identity first, and around that whole concept of being empowered by your disability and using that to educate, other people. um so it's when I'm writing, though, like if I'm writing an article, though, then I tend to use the person first language. But that's just kind of how and who knows how we're going to be viewing it in another 10 years. But that's my view.
Wow, thanks for sharing, Robin. I see Kat.
So
Sorry,
yeah,
Dr.
so when I
Facey.
think about those person first versus identity first, so I'm originally from the UK, and we look at things a little bit differently. And so we would typically use identity first. It's my understanding that the history of person first language was actually an advocacy movement from within the disabled community, because people were using really horrific language to describe folks, specifically those with intellectual and developmental disabilities, as, oh, they're a biter, they're a runner, they're a whatever. And they were describing them as their behaviors, not even as their disability, but they were describing challenging behaviors and not really acknowledging the person at all. And so there was a advocacy movement that was like, no, we need to put the person first. Like, I'm not a biter, I'm a person who sometimes engages in oral fixation. Like, it's two different things. But then as we've moved forward, it's like, things have shifted and things have changed. And so similarly to Robin, it depends on sort of the situation, because academically speaking, people do write often in person first language. I think in my dissertation, I chose to say I'm not doing that, and I'm going to use identity first, just because culturally that's what I'm used to, and that's what the most of my clients choose to use. But ultimately, it's up to every person. So not too long ago, the diagnosis of Asperger's was sort of removed from the clinical manual, and it's now just known as part of the autism spectrum disorders. But there is a large ASPE community that still loves that language and uses that language, and it's certainly not my place or any other professional's place to remove that right from them, or that ability. So I really start every meeting with every person I'm working with, what language do you like to use? How would you like me to talk about your disability? Ava, would you like to share about how you like to talk about your disability?
I don't know.
We'll take a quick pause and then I think we'll come back and finish that question.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah,
Here.
Pete.
For me, this is a really fascinating dialogue because within the deaf community, of course, I don't speak for all deaf folks, but we've always been using, deaf first. Sometimes people will say, well, you're a person with a hearing loss. But that's the many centuries where we've put deaf first. And I think that was one big separation that was made because we saw ourselves outside of the deaf disability community. And some people will say, well, first person language or identity first language, and put deaf first. But then also we're thinking about intersectionality and culture, and that has also evolved. And there are some folks who have different ways of identifying with their identities, maybe person first or disability first. And as an educator, I also, within my classes, give them an opportunity to know and honor your identities and your practices in this class. So with that, I ask them, tell me your name and tell me your pronouns and how do you identify yourself? And that helps me recognize and follow all of their preferences. And, I want them to see that I'm an educator that cares about my students. And I want to also recognize their identities. So if there's identities in the room that I don't know of, I'll do my homework and I'll do my research and I'll include it in my lesson plan. I'll sprinkle it in. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So great to hear from you all. I know that this is a question that folks really always ask about. And I think the key there is asking folks how they want to be, identified and asking them to identify themselves. So I really appreciate you all sharing your insight on that. I kind of want to talk about the pandemic. The last 3 years, how life has changed. But I'm curious to know if you all think the pandemic changed kind of public perception of people living with disabilities or chronic illness at all, and how that has maybe affected your lives.
Okay. I have noticed a lot of, people coming to the idea now that disability is something that can occur at any point in life and that it is not a predictable state of being. I think COVID has also, I feel like, has taught people too, though, the definition of what it means to be disabled or what, is considered disabling conditions. And I find that, especially now that people are identifying, as having like long COVID and having symptoms related to long COVID and about like the strokes and all of the, other complications that, COVID creates in the body and that we're still learning and still finding out about. I feel like it's done a lot of education too and showing and also educating people that these systems and processes that they assumed were in place to support people who become disabled, they are realizing that they're not there and are realizing the importance of being able to have, here, okay, in the United States, we don't have, healthcare for everyone. We have the system of some people, can get certain types of health care from the government, but majority, it's through like employment and, private kind of system. It's pretty messed up. But people are realizing that, hey, oh, wow, I don't have health care that is going to support me through this, and I'm unable to work now because I now have a disability. And so that is really, I'm finding that that's impacting a lot of people, but it's also that it's bringing that awareness. I think that one one place I've really noticed it, talking on social media, particularly like Twitter, where people are sharing, their symptoms and interacting with people around the world, about what's going on with them, or what's going, as a result of COVID. And so that's been bringing up a lot of, but there's also, I've also been seeing on Twitter where people are like, okay, you people now who have COVID and suddenly realizing, that now disability is the thing, but this is what we've been fighting for this whole time. So, get with the program kind of thing. I've seen some of that too. It's been very interesting, actually,
Mm,
watching, cultural attitudes and thoughts that are changing towards disability as a result.
mhm. Yeah. I really like how you talked about folks realizing that this is something that can happen to later in life for folks. I think that um, a lot of folks that I know have been recently diagnosed or have gone through a lot. So I think that's such a interesting thing to highlight, and an interesting kind of shift and change in the conversation. Um, Ava or B, do you have anything to add?
So I think we're going to do this. I'm going to ask Ava the questions, and that's going to be an easier way for us to communicate. So Ava, when
Awesome.
the pandemic was happening, did you feel like you were included in school, or do you feel like you were
Wait,
left
I
out?
feel like I answered that.
Only to me, so now you're going to answer again so they can all hear.
Oh gosh.
What do you think? Were you included at school, or were you left out when COVID was really happening?
I wasn't. No.
It's okay. We'll mute again. That's not a problem.
Okay.
No problem. We're ready whenever you are, Ava. B, did you have something you wanted to add?
I
This
just
is
wanted to
B.
tell Ava, I really like your top.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Same.
yeah, it related to COVID. It impacted the deaf community in many different ways. We saw the best and the worst, from our fellow community members. We call people who can hear hearing. So we saw a lot from the hearing community when the pandemic started. And we realized how much the world was reliant on hearing. As soon as the masks started being used, when we entered public spaces and people tried to speak with us, we were completely left out because we could no longer lip read. And they kept talking to us even with a mask on, and we tried to explain, I'm sorry, I can't read your lips. And now it's time for you to understand how to use gestures, use your phone, use a pen and paper to write, to communicate with us. And still to this day, we still face some people who refuse. They're not willing to accommodate and continue to wear the mask without trying to figure out how to communicate with us. So it's been very difficult for the deaf community. We've been heavily impacted from COVID. We've just been we've struggled all along, but when COVID started, we realized how desperately we were having to accommodate the hearing world. And then that was the first part of my question, or my answer. And then for the deaf blind community, when the pandemic started, it seriously impacted them even worse, because the deaf blind community relies on tactile communication. And so we couldn't really interact with people, deaf blind people, because of social distancing. And so trying to figure out how to talk to someone through Zoom. We'd have to have a deaf interpreter sitting with them. And some deaf interpreters didn't feel comfortable because they had to touch the deafblind individuals. And I mean, they actually experienced skin hunger because there was no touch. They're so used to relying on touch, and then not to have that for the 2 years. We just noticed that as a disparity that happened throughout the pandemic. We noticed also that it was wonderful having virtual options for interpreters and deaf individuals to be able to work from home. In Minnesota, we have a large interpreting community, but we don't have many Black, brown, or Indigenous or people of color interpreters. At our clinic, we really value people of different identities, and we want to make sure that they're included. So in person, we struggled to find interpreters who weren't white. And we really felt that didn't meet our demographic. And so as soon as COVID started, we had Zoom meetings. And so because of that, our staff interpreters were working so hard to try to get diverse interpreters, because we could use interpreters from around the country. And it was wonderful. So we could actually justify why it was important to have diverse interpreters of diverse identities. So deaf, blind, hard of hearing, late deafened individuals could connect with people of the same intersectional background, and they'd feel that they understood each other. So if we had a Latinx deaf person, they could have a Latinx interpreter, and it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. We just don't often think about that. And so I hope that encourages more people from the Black, brown, Indigenous, and people of color communities to realize that we need more interpreters of color to be able to meet the needs of our BIPOC, deaf, blind, deaf, disabled, late deafened communities.
Wow, yeah, thank you so much for that. So many of us hearing folks, didn't realize how much the masks and the barriers to communicating and building community really were. So thank you so much for bringing that to the forefront. I just want to pause for a second and say, Ava, I don't know if you saw, but you're getting so many shout outs in the chat for your fashions. So yay, everyone is loving the sparkle shirt. So well done. I feel
Thank you so much. I really appreciate
I wish
that.
I wore sparkle.
I really
everyone's
appreciate that.
I know I'm feeling very plain Jane sat next to the sparkly, fabulous Miss Ava.
Yeah, we are all really, everyone in the chat is so excited that you're here. So I just wanted to let you know what was happening in the chat. I wasn't sure if you got to see it.
We've been reading, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
Awesome. So I kind of want to switch gears and kind of get into talking about sexuality education in schools. And one of the folks in the chat put a question in, and they wanted to know what you all feel one of the largest barriers that needs to be addressed in order for folks with disabilities to get equal access to sexuality education. Yeah, Kat and Ava.
So I just asked Ava, did you ever receive any sex education in school?
My answer was no, I have not received any sex education in school.
So that right there is the barrier, right? People are still being taken out of health class. That's still being taken out of sexual education classes. Ava is super fortunate that they have an amazing family, a super supportive family who very much recognizes that everybody is sexual and everybody needs access to this information and sort me out. So we're able to work together. But Ava has not received any sex education in school. And how old are you now, Ava?
I'm 17.
About to be 18
Yes.
any day now. And so is in her final year of school and has made it through the public school system without receiving any sexuality
Well,
education?
I'm about to fall on the rise of the end of school for me because I'm about to go into 12th grade.
So you're a senior and has made it through without receiving any formal sex ed in school in a way that made sense, which is why we work together, right?
Yes.
So the barrier, I think, in my opinion, is that people still see people, especially with intellectual or developmental disabilities, as asexual. And when people are using that word, they're using it incorrectly because asexual is a valid identity and not meaning that I'm sure you all know what asexual means, but it's a term that is wrongly applied. And because of that, people are often taken out of classes to focus on other skills that somebody has deemed more important. Whereas, I'm a firm believer that understanding about sex and sexuality is way more important than some of the other skills, they're life skills that can be used daily in daily life and might be more important than, learning a mathematic equation or something. So yeah, that's my thoughts. Ava, did you want to add anything to that? How do you feel that you didn't have any sex ed in school? Does it bother you that you didn't get to go to that class or you didn't learn about it really?
Yeah, I am kind of bothered about that. I actually kind of wanted to have that for me.
And so we work together one-on-one, which is really great, but that's not a resource that everybody has access to.
No, it is not. I do have the folder over there.
You have your folder of all the stuff we've been working on?
Yes, I have.
That's good. I'm glad you're keeping it. Did you want to add anything else or shall I let the next person speak?
I don't know.
No? Okay.
I mean,
is it important for you to have sex ed? Is that an important thing for you?
it is very important for me.
Does having Down syndrome mean that you shouldn't have sex education?
No, it is not.
Do people with Down syndrome still have sexual needs and feelings and
Yes.
desires?
Yes.
And is it possible for people with Down syndrome to have sex?
Yes, they can have sex at any time they want, and they can also feel included in anything they want to be included in.
And so if you're not included in that at school, how does that make you feel?
Well, it doesn't make me feel, it also makes other people feel as well. It makes me and the other people feel like we're being bullied in that area. And that really, really bothers me and offends me.
Yeah, I think everybody who felt like they were being bullied or excluded or left out would feel the same way. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to mute and let somebody else speak, okay?
I just wanted to ask Ava a really quick question. So were you pulled out of the class? Did they have sex? They were teaching sex ed and then they wouldn't let you take it?
You're not sure.
I'm not sure about that. Maybe or maybe not.
Okay.
Yeah, which is also a problem, right? That Ava, is clearly a very capable young woman who does an amazing job learning and studying sex education.
I
Right.
am very capable of things,
Mhm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I do not want anyone to push my boundaries too far. And I want to let all of you know that please do not diss my ability. I have an ability and I can use it for any strength I want, and I can use it for my power and for good.
And so knowing that and knowing how strong of an advocate that Ava is for herself and for other people around her, knowing that Ava isn't really even sure what sex education, and it's possible that there were classes that Ava was in where it was talked about, but it clearly was not presented in a way that Ava was able to sort of comprehend or be an active participant in her own learning, because we have covered every sexuality topic you can think of, and I've yet to find one that you haven't grasped and understood, and we talk about it in depth. So there's absolutely no reason why Ava could not have learnt that in a classroom. There's no reason why that couldn't have happened.
By the way, I am Ava Rose McIntosh.
Ava Rose McIntosh, the one and only.
And I feel so honored to be on this panel.
We are honored to have you, Ava. Thank you so much for being here. And you're getting so many shouts out in the chat for your inspiring words. And there's even a few people that have the same middle name as you. So you have some name twins in the audience today. Yes, everyone's so honored to have you. Oh, that's awesome. All right, B, did you want to add anything on this, or should I go ahead and go on to the next question?
Would you mind repeating the question again?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we just wanted to, someone in the chat wanted to know what you feel the largest barrier that needs to be addressed in order to get equal access to sexuality education for folks with disabilities.
Yes, now I remember the question. This is a little bit challenging for me to answer because I firmly believe that people who teach need to be the same identity. So if deaf, deafblind, deaf disabled, hard of hearing, late deafened individuals learn from a hearing person, there are, too many interpreters are not trained in this content. And so it's not accessible. When I remember my very first exposure to my sex education class, my interpreter refused to use the signs. She just fingerspelled the entire way. Can you imagine a teacher using those terms and an interpreter just spelling the words rather than actually showing me the signs? I mean, it was awful. And unfortunately, I'm not the only one who's had this experience. There are so many interpreters that do this to students. And the training programs do not provide sexuality education to the interpreters. And so they're lost. So maybe they have one day and they'll say, hey, let's learn about sex, alcohol, and drugs. I mean, what is that trying to tell us? So sex is like alcohol and drugs? The students need that information, but they're not getting, if the interpreters are not able to interpret that content, then they have a double barrier. About more than 90% of deaf, deafblind, deaf disabled children are born to hearing families, which is fine. I was born to a hearing family as well, but I'm one of very few children who had full access to ASL growing up. My parents happened to decide they wanted to learn, but most deaf kids don't have that experience. Most of their parents don't learn. They force them to read lips, get hearing aids. And, there's a lot of research that proves that ASL is the best way to learn language for deaf children. And obviously they can learn through having hearing aids and learning to speak as well, but they need ASL. And often they don't have any opportunities for incidental learning. Hearing people when they're riding the bus, they hear people talking about different world events, or obviously they end up not having access to sex education because of those same barriers. And that it just layers of barriers. So many of my clients that I meet, often they're over 30 years old before they start learning about periods. Can you imagine going through 30 years of life and just finally understanding why we bleed? No one ever took the time to explain it to them. So there are just so many multiple barriers.
Yeah, and I really like what you said about the training for interpreters and other folks who support. When I worked in schools and I had students that had a support person with them, oftentimes those people weren't trained and they would take the person out of the room or tell them, or they didn't have to do this specific part because of what Dr. Fazey was talking about earlier, and assuming folks or mislabeling folks as asexual. And so I always go back to that training part. So I love that you're doing that work specifically with interpreters. And you know, and all of you doing that work, it's such an important thing, the training and professional development, 1000%.
I, oh,
Definitely. Thank you.
I,
Go
okay.
ahead, Robin.
Sorry. I have ADHD, so sometimes I get really excited and I want to talk, and I'm like, oh wait, but one thing that I was trying to say, that I was thinking about as far as like barriers, you know, mentioning, you know, people don't think of people like disabled people as being, you know, sexual beings, as like being able to express their sexuality, you know, or thinking that, yeah, or, you know, disabled people have more important things to worry about, you know, than sex, as though it's something that you have to put on the back burner, or like it's a privilege rather than a human, you know, a human right and part of who we are as people. Um, but the other barrier that I also see is how sex ed is taught. A lot of times, you know, they'll think of sex ed as only preventative, you know, like, okay, preventing pregnancy, preventing STD, preventing, um, you know, being abused, you know, or sexually, but, you know, um, there isn't education around pleasure, relationships, you know, and all of those sort of things. And also, I see barriers, like I heard, you know, how it was touched on um, earlier, with Dr. Catton and Ava were mentioning, you know, the formats that the education is presented in. You need to meet people where they are. You need to find ways of making the curriculum accessible for, you know, people disabilities. You need to. I have a friend who is blind, and that is a set, and she is a sex educator, and you know she talks about like using models, like 3D models, and being able to touch and, you know, hold things. And there's somebody that I follow on Twitter who is also a Dr. Ava, and she is blind and she's in the UK, and she is currently pregnant. And she was talking about how, because she couldn't see the chart about like contractions or whatever, how they made these little beads for her to, like these little spacer beads, so she can kind of feel like how contractions are supposed to be and things like that. I've seen where, you know, like, because that reproductive health and making it accessible is very exciting to me. So, you know, like having models that you can feel of like a fetal development, or, you know, what's going on, because you can't see like your ultrasound, but you can feel it if you can make it like a 3D.
Mhm.
But it's, there's a lot of barriers, but yeah, but a large part of it is, you know, those cultural attitudes towards accepting the fact that sexuality is just a part of what it is of being human, and disability is just a natural part of that human condition. So
Mm.
it's a human thing, and so as humans, we need that education about our bodies. And so to me, for me, it, one of the barriers is addressing the humanity in, um
Yes. Yes. Thank you for saying that. Addressing people's humanity, right? Thank you. Um, so we have time for maybe one or two more questions. And one question that folks have asked a lot is, what do young people with disabilities need to feel safe in schools?
So Ava, when you're at school, what do you like at school to help you feel really good about being there?
I'm not sure.
what do you not like that happens at school that does not make you want to be there?
The thing I don't like that makes me not feel like I want to be in school is being talked over and people saying aggressive things to me. That really makes me feel like I want to cry or shut down or kill myself. And I know that killing myself is not the right thing to do. But when I'm feeling that worked up and overwhelmed and stressed, I feel that way a lot. And it bothers me, and I bet it also bothers other people too. And I also feel like it bothers the people on this panel.
Yeah, I bet it does bother a lot of people.
And knowing that I'm on sex con education, I feel like I'm at home here.
That's great. So the people here have been very supportive and accepting and given you lots of compliments and given you the space to take the time that you need to be able to answer questions. Are those things that if that happened at school, would that make you feel better about being at school?
It would actually make me feel like I can be more included and feel like I can be more involved in opportunities and like opportunities and other programs.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me feel like I can do things in a way that I can see myself as passionate as I can be.
That's awesome. And I think from the professional standpoint, inclusion and accessibility is hard work. It's not an easy thing to do, and people have to want to do it. It's an active choice that has to be made. And so if you're an educator, if you're working in a school setting, it really is, an IEP is a piece of paper that is often overlooked or not really understood. But it's really taking the time to understand who are the kids in your class, who will you be teaching, and spending time, learning about that, learning what that child needs, and then, actively providing all of those supports that are in place. All too often people, will have an IEP in paper, but then there's not enough aides, the aide didn't show up that day, so now somebody doesn't get an aide. The spaces aren't accessible or the activity isn't accessible. So for folks with physical disabilities, they're often given sort of odd tasks to do when there's a group activity in place. It's like, oh, you can be the person who holds the clipboard rather than being an active participant, because the person doing the educating hasn't taken the time to think about how can I really make this activity or this experience inclusive and engaging for every single person in the classroom. And I think for the most part, that's done not out of hate, but out of ignorance, out of not knowing. And so hopefully that's where us as professionals can come in and provide that education to educators so that they have ideas and they have more tools in their toolbox to make a space truly accessible for folks. Do you want to add anything else?
I can really speak to what you said. I feel like that is really powerful, and I feel like that makes my heart warm.
Well, that's good. Thanks. I appreciate the support, Ava.
You're welcome.
Gosh, thank you so much. That really resonates with me. I think a lot of times folks will be like, oh, here is this one adaptation you can make in your lesson. Now you've been inclusive to all folks. And that's never it, right? There's multiple things, and we've never finished. There's so many different ways to be more inclusive, and we can always work more on that. And plug for our next session, we're going to be talking about how to do that. But I do want to ask one more question that I think is really important before we wrap up. And what we hear sometimes is that there are parents who are not comfortable teaching their child with a disability about sex and sex education. And so I'm curious to our panelists, what might you say to those parents who are not comfortable or questioning if they should do it or what they should do, or what could be like some of their, their first or next steps if they're just uncomfortable talking to their child? Yeah, B.
Hi, this is B here. I know that being uncomfortable, especially for this topic, is normal. I think we need to normalize that. And I do think we want to make sure that the child is confident with their body and their identity. There are many ways for children to feel confident. And I think one of them is understanding their body and what's happening in their body. And if break that down, but leave parts out, it's going to impact them. And I think it's important to provide them that connection to their body, to connection to sexuality. They need to know that they're a sexual being. They are human. They are human. Maybe they will be sexual later and maybe they won't. And that's really up for them to decide. Give them the resources, the tools for them to decide and make an informed decision. And I think that will help them establish a relationship with their body and it will help them long term and they'll love themselves more.
I'm all for people loving themselves more. Listen, we all need to love ourselves just a little bit more for sure. Thank you for that, B. Yeah, even Dr. Fazey.
So Ava, if you knew that a parent didn't want to talk to their kid about sex because they had a disability, what do you think about that?
I think that is just rude and very, very, very wrong of them not allowing their children to participating in the sex ed.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's something that happens for parents who have children who are born with disabilities is that they
Like
sometimes
me.
they sometimes experience something called chronic sorrow, where they're told their child won't be able to do a lot of things. And so parents learn to, sort of grieve some expected milestones that they may have been thinking about when they were pregnant or when they were planning a family. Like, maybe my child will never get married, maybe my child will never have kids, things of that nature. And so part of that is sort of thinking that maybe my child won't be sexual, but conflating sexual behavior with sexuality is a huge thing. And so there are many people who have very healthy, happy sex lives, and there are many people who choose not to engage in that, but that doesn't mean that they're not sexual. And so, as B had said, really, learning about what's happening to your body, learning to love your body, learning to explore your body is such a huge part of sexuality and doesn't need to include another person, but regardless of your disability. You need the information.
I did really like what B said. I feel like it's important to be in your body and to be in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really inclusive.
Awesome.
Thank you. Robin, did you have anything you wanted to add on this question before we wrap up?
No, actually, I was listening, and I I agree with what both what Ava was talking about, and also B, what B was saying. I but I also appreciated the fact that B, mentioned that, we need to acknowledge that, yeah, that might be something that's uncomfortable for a lot of people to talk about, sexuality, period. Hence, all the different laws and things around who can talk to when and where and how. And um I feel like because I'm a parent um as well, and my child is proudly autistic, and I know that as a sex educator, that yes, how the importance of it, making sure that I talk to my child, but yeah, and that was it was uncomfortable, for me, because you're like, ah, that's my baby, but at the same time, I'm like, of course, I want you to learn, and I want you to have the facts, and I want you to feel comfortable and able to talk to me about anything related to sexuality and your body and things like that. And interactions, maybe with other people, because I just felt like a healthy way. That's a healthy, exchange, and being able to do that. But
Yeah.
I but it's just, the thing is that I kind of wanted, when I talk to parents, sometimes I'm like, you do realize that kids don't stay kids, they grow up. And
What?
so,
What, Robin?
so yeah, you're gonna have to acknowledge that part. And so, but I'm also all about, like, that whole meeting people where you are, age appropriate. You don't have,
Mhm.
you teach them, first about, sex, about your body, and the whole good touches and bad touches, and what, and consent, and teaching those concepts. And then, as you can understand more, or as you're older, you meet them where they are. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, listen, let's get comfortable being uncomfortable, folks. That's what I like to say. Like, here we are, let's get into it. We are out of time for our panel, but I just want to say thank you so much for all of you being here. I mean, I feel like we could have this discussion for the rest of the night. But hopefully we can do a part 2 at another time. But I just want to say thank you so much for being here and for being vulnerable and sharing your experiences and your expertise and your fashions. I think we need to make more space for these type of discussions. And I'm just really, I feel so privileged to be here in this Zoom screen with you all tonight for me. Anyway, so thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to seeing you out in the world wherever we may cross paths.
Thank you so much, everybody. This is great.
I feel so honored. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, I want to keep watching.
Yes, thank you all. And please stay on and keep watching for our next segment. Thank you all so much. And we're going to get started with our next segment. Thank you, everyone.